Your throat feels like sandpaper. Your skull is pounding. Every joint in your body is screaming at once. Today you know exactly what to do. Grab a bottle, swallow 2 pills, forget about it in 20 minutes flat. Now rewind 60,000 years. Same fever, same 2 a.m., same pain, but there's no bottle on a nightstand. No 24-hour pharmacy. No hospital lit up somewhere down a highway you could drive to. Just you, a fire burning low, and a handful of people around you who have exactly one job right now. Figure out whether you live or die with nothing but their hands and their memory. No antibiotics. No anesthesia, no thermometers, no x-rays, not even the concept of a germ. And yet humans didn't just limp through this way for a few generations and get lucky. They survived it for 300,000 years straight. So the real question was never, did ancient humans have medicine? The real question is, what does medicine even look like before it has a name, a diploma, or a building? Quick comparison so this actually lands. The average American sees a doctor about 4 times a year and keeps more chemical compounds in one bathroom cabinet than an entire ancient tribe would ever encounter across an entire lifetime. Our ancestors had access to none of that. What they had instead was something far harder to build and far, far easier to lose forever. Let's start with a skeleton that, by every modern medical logic, shouldn't exist. In the 1950s, archaeologist Ralph Solke cracked open a cave system in northern Iraq called Shannadar. Inside, he found the remains of a Neanderthal man now known as Shannadar I, dated to roughly 45,000 years ago. This man was missing most of his right arm. He was blind in one eye. His leg had been crushed at some point and healed badly, leaving him with a limp so severe he almost certainly couldn't hunt, couldn't run, couldn't keep up. Alone in the wild, a man like this dies in weeks, maybe days, but his bones tell a different story. Years of healing after the original injury. Years of someone bringing him food. Years of someone protecting him from predators he couldn't outrun. Years of a group deciding, over and over, that he was still worth keeping alive long after he stopped being useful in any practical sense. This isn't survival of the fittest. This is survival of the supported, and it's tens of thousands of years older than we ever gave it credit for. Now here's where the story gets stranger. Archaeologists have pulled human skulls out of the ground, hundreds of them from sites across Europe, South America, and North Africa with clean, deliberate circular holes carved directly into the bone. The practice is called trepanation. Some of these skulls date back more than 7,000 years. Here's the detail that should genuinely stop you. Many of them show new bone growth forming around the edge of the hole. That means the patient didn't die on the table. They lived. For months. Sometimes for years afterward. Researchers studying trepan skulls from ancient Peru recorded survival rates above 80% in some samples, a number that beats skull surgery performed during the American Civil War, 7,000 years later with metal instruments and zero understanding of infection control. This wasn't blind ritual. This wasn't superstition dressed up as surgery. This was a repeatable surgical technique, tested, refined, and passed down by people we've spent centuries calling primitive. Now meet Ötzi 1991, a melting glacier on the border of Italy and Austria. Hikers stumble onto a frozen body preserved almost perfectly, roughly 5,300 years old. Ötzi's skin is covered in over 60 tattoos. For decades, nobody thought much of them. Then researchers finally mapped their exact placement, and things got interesting fast. These weren't decorative symbols scattered randomly across his body. They were clusters of simple lines stamped directly over his joints, his knees, his ankles, his lower spine, the exact locations where X-rays later revealed arthritis and degenerative joint damage. A growing number of researchers now believe these marks represent an early form of pain treatment, placed almost precisely over points still used in acupuncture today, a practice that wouldn't be formally documented in writing for thousands more years. But that's not even the most interesting object Ötzi was carrying. In his pouch, researchers found 2 pieces of a fungus called birch polypore, which carries documented antibacterial and antiparasitic properties. Ötzi's remains also tested positive for whipworm infection. He wasn't carrying a snack for the road. He was carrying his medicine cabinet, 5,000 years before medicine cabinets existed, 4th piece of evidence, and this one is still walking around today. Anthropologists studying the Hadza of Tanzania, one of the last hunter-gatherer societies left on Earth, have documented their use of over 80 distinct plant species for treating wounds, fevers, stomach pain, and parasites. The Jehonsi of the Kalahari Desert carry a similarly deep well of botanical knowledge, all of it held entirely in memory, passed down by word of mouth, refined across what researchers estimate could be thousands of years of trial, failure, and correction. No books, no labels, no shelf life printed on the side. Just memory stress-tested against real death generation after generation until only the parts that actually worked survived. 5th, broken bones, and thousands of them. Paleopathologists, scientists who specialize in ancient disease and injury, have cataloged an enormous number of healed fractures across the human fossil record, and a striking number of them healed in near-perfect alignment. That doesn't happen by accident, and it definitely doesn't happen if you're left alone in the grass to heal crooked. Someone set that bone by hand. Someone built a splint out of wood, bark, or hide. Someone fed that person and protected them for the 6 to 8 weeks it physically takes a broken femur to knit itself back together. And sixth, the one that hits hardest. A Bronze Age burial site in Vietnam uncovered the remains of a young man who had been paralyzed from the waist down for at least a decade before he died, based on the deterioration pattern in his bones. Someone bathed him. Someone fed him by hand. Someone turned his body regularly to prevent the exact kind of skin breakdown that kills paralyzed patients even in modern hospitals today. This wasn't abandonment. This was a group of people deciding every single day for roughly 10 straight years that his life was still worth the cost of keeping it going. So let's actually reconstruct what all of this looked like on the ground. On an ordinary day tens of thousands of years ago, you're out hunting. Something goes wrong, a slip on wet rock, a spear thrower that catches at the wrong angle, and now there's a deep gash running across your forearm, bleeding harder than it should. You don't panic. Panic wastes blood and it wastes breath, and both of those are about to matter a lot. You press the wound shut with the cleanest piece of hide you're carrying, and already someone from your group is moving toward you because they've seen this exact injury before. Not once. Many times they clean the wound first, water if there's a source nearby, or in some documented contexts, substances with natural antiseptic properties like specific tree resins or ash. Then comes a paste pressed directly into the wound, maybe crushed yarrow, maybe a chewed plant pulp with astringent blood-slowing properties. None of this came from a textbook because there is no textbook. It came from watching someone else do it correctly and watching someone else do it wrong and learning the difference the hard way over and over until the technique became instinct. The wound gets packed, then wrapped tight enough to slow the bleeding, loose enough that blood keeps moving through the limb because cutting off circulation entirely is its own kind of death sentence. That balance takes years to learn, years of trial, years of mistakes that cost fingers, hands, sometimes lives before the technique got refined into something reliable enough to trust. You're told to rest the arm completely. Not because anyone read that advice anywhere, but because generations before you noticed a pattern, the people who kept using a fresh wound healed slower or didn't heal at all. That observation, repeated enough times across enough lives, becomes a rule. And rules like that get passed down exactly the way stories do: spoken, demonstrated, corrected, spoken again. For the next few days you run a fever, and this is where things get genuinely dangerous. There's no concept of infection at the microscopic level here. No germ theory. No idea that anything invisible could be attacking you from the inside. But there's still a response, and it's not random. You're kept warm, then cooled, then warmed again, in a rhythm refined across centuries of watching who survived a fever and who didn't. You're given liquid constantly because somewhere in the deep past, someone noticed that the people who stopped drinking during a fever were almost always the ones who died. That single observation, repeated enough times, became a survival rule as firm as any written protocol today. Willow bark might be steeped and given to you to bring the fever down. It contains a compound called salicin, the exact same compound modern aspirin is chemically derived from. Nobody around you understands the biochemistry. Nobody needs to. They just know from direct, repeated experience that it works. And that's the entire engine their medicine runs on. Observe an outcome, remember it, repeat the action that produced it, discard the actions that didn't. 10 days pass. The fever breaks. The wound's angry red edges start to calm into something that will scar over but hold. You're weak, drained, barely able to stand, but you're alive, not because of a single flash of genius. Because of an inherited, tested, constantly corrected body of practical knowledge that never had a name for itself but functioned exactly the way medicine functions today. Observe, intervene, remember, repeat, and pass it on before you die. And here's the turn, the part that should completely change how you think about everything you just heard. For most of human history, medical knowledge wasn't stored in a textbook, a database, or a hospital chart. It was stored in people. Specifically, it was stored disproportionately in the oldest members of any group. The ones who had already lived through the most fevers, set the most bones, buried the most losses, and learned the hard way dozens of times over what actually worked and what quietly killed. Anthropologists Kim Hill and Magdalena Hurtado, studying the Ache people of Paraguay, found that older, non-hunting members of the group still delivered enormous value to everyone's survival, specifically through decades of accumulated ecological and medical knowledge that younger, physically stronger hunters simply hadn't had time to earn yet, no matter how strong or fast they were. This is a huge, quiet reason humans evolved to live so far past their reproductive years compared to almost every other species on the planet. Researchers sometimes call this the grandmother hypothesis, and the logic behind it isn't sentimental at all, it's brutally practical. An elder who remembered exactly which plant stopped bleeding, which one broke a fever, and which berry would kill you outright within hours, was worth more to a group's chances of survival than almost anyone else standing in that camp. Lose that one person and you don't just lose a grandparent. You lose decades of irreplaceable, untranscribed data that no one else in the group has fully memorized. That's the actual foundation modern medicine is built on top of. Every antibiotic sitting in a pharmacy, Every surgical technique taught in a medical school, every over-the-counter painkiller in your bathroom cabinet traces its lineage back through centuries of formal science. But that science itself traces back even further into caves, camps, and firelit nights where someone noticed a pattern, took a genuinely terrifying risk on another human being, and either it worked or it didn't. And either way, someone remembered exactly what happened and told the next person. You live in a world where that entire ancient chain has been replaced almost completely by convenience. A cut becomes a bottle of antiseptic pulled off a shelf. A fever becomes a pill you don't even think twice about swallowing. You've never once had to wonder if the knowledge required to save your life will actually be there when you need it, because it's been standardized, mass-produced, and made available at a scale no ancient healer could have ever imagined possible. But somewhere behind every single medicine you've ever taken in your life is an unbroken chain of people who tried something dangerous on purpose, watched what happened next with their own eyes, and passed the knowledge on anyway, knowing full well it might not work, knowing full well it might cost someone their life. You didn't inherit their comfort. You inherited their risk.